Good morning. We found Joseph in the pit. Now, Joseph, the youngest, and the next to the youngest of 12 brothers, and the son of Jacob's beloved Rachel, had gone too far. He was his father's favorite, and his brothers knew it and had a little bit of resentment there. But then he told them of a dream he'd had, a dream where he saw all of them bowing down before him. And he wore that beautiful coat that his father had given him when he was sent out to check up on them. And when they weren't where he expected them to be, he chastised them a little bit. And that was just too much. His brothers took him and they threw him into a pit in the desert. When Joseph heard someone coming and expected it to be his brothers pulling him out, when he got to the top of the pit, it was not his brothers at all, but strangers, Arabs to whom he had been sold. And he joined them against his will in their caravan and was taken to Egypt, where he was sold as a slave. Things were not looking good for Joseph, but he used his God-given talents in the home to which he was sold, and because of his skills at organization and management, he was given more and more power until the wife of his master asked him to do things which he was not prepared to do, things which he knew his God would not approve of. And when he refused her, she had him thrown in prison. And still Joseph did not despair. He again used his God-given talents and was given some responsibilities around the prison. And there were two other prisoners there. Well, there were lots of other prisoners there, but two of note had been employed in Pharaoh's palace. One as the royal cup holder, who would take the cup to Pharaoh, and the other as the royal baker. And as it happened, they both had dreams on the same night and wondered what they could mean. Well, Joseph had some skill in interpreting dreams also, and he listened to their dreams and told them what would happen. And what he told came true. But before they were released from prison, he asked them to be sure and tell Pharaoh about him. Well, the one couldn't do it because he was hanged. But the other one, the cupbearer, he forgot. And for 2 long years, Joseph remained in prison, waiting for his chance and hoping for his chance. And when he did get his chance, when Pharaoh had a dream that he did not understand and none of his magicians and wise men could interpret, that's when the cupbearer remembered Joseph. And he told Pharaoh about that Hebrew man in prison who had interpreted both of their dreams correctly. And so Joseph was sent for. And when he came and listened to Pharaoh's dream, he told him that God was telling Pharaoh that there would be 7 years of famine, or 7 years of plenty, 7 years of plenty when the land would produce more than it ever had. But those 7 years would be followed by 7 years of famine.
Hope. Joseph had hope. Joseph had hope that God would lead him out of his terrible circumstances and reunite him with his father, his mother, and his brother. Having his own brothers try to kill him and then selling him into slavery, well, that didn't provide a whole lot of hope. But eventually his circumstances did change and his hope was restored. What is hope? Most of us have a good feeling about what is hope, but I think we would be a bit challenged to try and define it. So here, hope is a noun. As a noun, it is a feeling and a desire for a certain thing to happen. Okay. Hope as a verb is something that you want to happen. And there is also an archaic definition of hope, which is a feeling of trust. Well, let me ask you, let's ask the verb part for you. What do you hope for? And you can say something. Yes, I am asking you. What do you hope for? Jane Ann. That you'll meet your Maker. Well, I'm sure you will in God's own time. I think many of us are hoping it doesn't rain. Those are little things. Well, what about it? What about some other things that you hope for? Peace. Common sense, okay? All right, some of you are saying something, but it's very quiet back there. I could name names. No? Okay. All right. Well, I used to have big hopes. I hope that the world could be changed so that everyone would know justice and peace and security. I hope that everyone could be inspired to overcome their differences and love each other. I hope that everyone would get along and peacefully resolve their conflicts. I hoped that everyone would always seek to be reconciled with everyone. I hope that everyone would always strive to treat each other fairly with dignity and respect. Maybe some of you had those hopes too. Maybe some of you still do. I hope that people would respect the world and treat it with dignity and respect. I hope that the people would consider the well-being of other people more important than seeking more money or power or prestige for themselves. But as a pastor now, my hope is for you, for all of you, for you to know God personally. I hope that you will know the presence of God so that you will know that you are never alone, and that despite your circumstances, which may be grim, they may be dreadful, God always loves you. God doesn't want you to suffer. God desires good for you. And I hope that you will realize that you're okay, that you will be okay. I know that there will be times when your circumstances will not be okay, but you are okay, and you will be okay. Do not be afraid, because the loving God is with you always.
So, 7 years of good harvest, 7 years of no harvest. That was the prediction that Joseph made from the dream that Pharaoh had. But that's not all that Joseph said. Not only did he interpret the dream, but he was able on the spot to come up with a way to deal with the future. He suggested that they should go out and during the 7 years of good harvest, they should put aside at least a fifth of every harvest and store it up and save it for the bad times to come. And Pharaoh listened to that, and he made Joseph the one in charge of seeing that it would be so. He made Joseph his second in command. He gave him fine clothes. He put a gold chain around his neck, gave him a ring from his own hand. And Joseph proceeded to do the work after he told Pharaoh that it was God's will and that he had been able to interpret this dream. And so Joseph set about making sure that there would be plenty stored up during those 7 years of plenty. And just as had been predicted, after that the Nile stopped flooding, and without the floods there was not fertile ground in which to plant. And so anything that was planted didn't grow, and there were no harvests. And as the famine spread throughout the land, people began to come, and they were asking for food. And Joseph opened up the storehouses, and he was the one in charge of distributing the food. Now, 29 years after his brothers had thrown him into the pit and sold him into slavery, he was selling food when 10 Canaanites came in front of him, and he recognized them. They were his 10 older brothers. But Joseph looked like an Egyptian now. He was dressed like an Egyptian. He sounded like an Egyptian. his brothers did not recognize him. And at first Joseph made it hard for them. He accused them of being spies, sent to see how Egypt was suffering and take the word back. They protested that they were not spies, but honest men, sons of the same father. And that as he questioned them further, he found out that his father, Jacob, was still alive, and his younger brother, Benjamin, was at home with his father, because his father feared that some harm would come to Benjamin if he accompanied his brothers. And so then Joseph said that they had to prove themselves to him. They had to send for Benjamin. He would not give them any food until Benjamin was before him. And he locked his brothers up. But after 3 days, he brought them out again, and he said that wasn't what he was going to do. He was going to give them food. He was going to keep one of them in captivity, and the other 9 would go back with food for their families, but they would not get any more unless they brought Benjamin back with them. And so they were given bags of food and sent on their way. And when they were partway home and opened the first bag, they discovered that the money that had been paid for the food was included in the bag. And they were afraid that they would be accused of stealing. When they got home, they told Jacob all that had happened and that they had to take Benjamin back. And he said, "Why did you tell them about Benjamin? Why did you tell them about me?" And they said, "Well, we didn't tell you. He just asked us questions and we had to answer." Well, Jacob refused to send Benjamin, and so another couple years passed until they used up all the food that had been brought back, and they had no choice but to go and get more. And Jacob had no choice but to send Benjamin. And so the 11 brothers went back this time, and they appeared before Joseph. And Joseph was overcome when he saw his brother Benjamin. Benjamin was also the son of Rachel. And he had to leave the room. And when he came back, he fed those brothers, and they kind of had a feast, and he said that they would have plenty to take back, and he told his steward to fill their bags and again to put the money back in them. And they were sure that they would have gotten in trouble for that, but the steward told them it was all right. But then again, the money was returned to them, but this time a silver cup that belonged to Joseph, one that he used in his divination, when he told fortunes and things like that, was put into Benjamin's sack. The brothers went on their way, but they hadn't gone far when the steward from Joseph's house came upon them and said, "Why did you steal a silver cup? All that he's given to you, all that he's done for you, how could you steal from him?" And they said, "We didn't take anything." But the steward proceeded to open the sacks one by one from the oldest to the youngest, and he found it in Benjamin's sack. And they said that they couldn't allow Benjamin to suffer for what they should have, their fault that Joseph had come to all this. They couldn't let Benjamin be the one that would suffer. It would kill their father. So one by one, the brothers all volunteered to take his place, but they were all taken back. And again, his older brothers said that they would stand in for Benjamin's punishment. And at that point, Joseph announced to his brothers who he really was. And they were overcome with remorse. They were sure that they would be punished for what they had done to him. But he said, no, I forgive you. And what's more, you have done me and everyone a great service. You have done God's will. Because God has sent me here to Egypt. Without me, the famine would have happened and there would have been no food to share. So not only have you saved your own families, but you have saved all the families of these Egyptians as well. And it has been God's will that I was sent here, and you were only doing God's will.
Forgiveness is the act of forgiving. To forgive is to give up resentment and your claim to be requited or to be compensated. In regard to the one you forgive, To forgive is to grant relief from any payment or reimbursement from your perceived harm. Now, Joseph had quite a challenge to forgive his brothers. They tried to kill him. They sold him into slavery. And we have all heard stories of people forgiving others for horrendous acts of harm. We've heard about people who forgive the person who tried to murder them or who actually did murder someone that they loved. But then we all have heard stories of people who did not forgive these and other offenses, and our TV, movies, and books are all filled with people not forgiving and seeking revenge or payback. There are three main aspects to personal forgiveness. There is forgiving someone or someone's for an offense done to oneself. This is the situation that Joseph faced. There is having offended someone or someone's, and one desires to have forgiveness from those that they have offended. This would be the situation of Joseph's brothers. That's what they faced. And then there is forgiving oneself for an offense one has received or one has done. Oftentimes, this is the hardest of all to do. Many times we fail to forgive ourselves because we believe that we were smarter than what we were, or we were more able than what we were than to get ourselves into that offensive situation. And it is hard oftentimes to accept that we were helpless to be hurt or to hurt someone else. Each of these situations requires one accepting oneself, that they are limited, that they are a fallible human being, and that other people are limited and fallible human beings. God can help us to forgive because, well, God forgives us. And forgiveness gives hope. Forgiving someone for asking for forgiveness from someone else can open the door to the possibility of a better relationship. Forgiving oneself can open the door to the possibility of a better future for ourselves by not allowing ourselves to wallow in guilt and fear. So, think on God and think of forgiveness as a means of hope for all of us.
I don't know if you did the math, but by the time Joseph reunites with his family, he has spent more time in Egypt than he did growing up with his father and his brothers. And so we're told in Scripture that Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Tell your brothers that they are welcome here, and it pleases me that they will live with us, and that I will give to them the best land that I have to offer." And I can't help but hear the overtones of Ruth and Naomi in that dialogue, that your people, your land, your God will be mine. We will be one in this. Because Pharaoh says, "Say to your brothers, do this, load your beasts and go back to the land of Canaan. Take your father and your households and come to me. I will give you the best land in all of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat of this land." And you, Joseph, are commanded to say, "Do this, take wagons and land from Egypt for your little ones, for your wives. Bring your father and come. And have no concern for your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours." No contract, no rental agreement, no purchase agreement. Language that expresses a covenant between two people. Come and be with us. I will give you what you need to bring your people here. Do not worry about the stuff you have. It's not about the stuff. Come and be. Whatever stuff you can't carry, we will do the makeup. We will be with you in this. And so the sons of Israel did just that. They packed their belongings. They put their stuff onto wagons and carts. And this is monumental for the people of Egypt, people of Israel, because they were a nomadic people. They had not settled. They were used to wandering. And God comes to Jacob and says, "Behold, I make this covenant with you like I did with your father and your father's father, that your people will number far beyond count and measure. And I want you to know that I am in this land with you." And so they came, and they settled, and they became one with the land and one with the people. And as they came, Joseph saw his family, his father, who he had not seen for several decades, his father who's alive. And that moment, no doubt, was tearful and joyful, because the scripture tells us that David buried his head in his father's shoulder and wept loudly. And they spent that time celebrating that moment. And Jacob, like the good father that he was, pulled his son away, looked him in the eye, and said, "Now I can die. I see your mother in your face. I am joyful that you are still alive." I think Jacob would also want to say, "Though I do not recognize you because you have no hair, there are no eyebrows. Where is the hair, and why did you become one with these people?" But the text doesn't say that. We only know that because Joseph became an Egyptian and became the bridge for those early Israelites and Egypt to find a way to be together. All the persons belonging to Jacob who came into Egypt were his own descendants, and they numbered a small number, about 70. And as they came forward, Joseph lavished them with gifts of money and gifts of clothing. We're told that each of the brothers and all of the children and the wives received 1 day's worth of clothing except for Benjamin. We do not know why Joseph gave to Benjamin what he gave. We could surmise that it is because in Benjamin, Joseph saw too his mother, just like Jacob did. Benjamin received 5 times what the rest of the brothers did. And as Joseph sends the family to go explore the land, he gives them one commandment: do not argue. And I couldn't help but think about the power of that journey and arrival and the receipt of the gifts and the hugs and the kisses and the joy that was celebrated by the family, and then to hear Joseph say, "Go explore this land that is yours, but do not argue." I wonder if there's a message for the church in that. I wonder if there's a message in our churches in Joseph's story. I wonder if we hear this story of embracing and love and support and covenant between two desperate, though similar people. I was talking to Melanie earlier this week. She was in the Sunday school room, and I said, "What were you doing a year ago around this time?" And I prepped Melanie for that question because I knew that it would come up. I could make it come up in today's message. Do you remember your answer, Melanie? I know you're not making eye contact. You're hiding behind Marty, and I can move myself. But do you remember your answer?
I didn't know at first, and then I remembered we were cleaning things and giving things away and selling things and preparing for you to come join us.
That the people of Pilgrim were preparing the best of their building for Plymouth to arrive. Cleaning, organizing, making a space for our two families to coexist. And when we were going through VBS, I couldn't help but see our story in the Joseph story. I couldn't help but realize that Pharaoh gave to Joseph the best of land. As we unfold the rest of that story, all of Egypt is in famine except for this little piece of land that's prosperous. No rental contract, no contract on purchase, nothing that says anything except, this is yours. God tells the Israelites to be fruitful and multiply. Families come in three basic varieties. There's the family that we're born into, and we look to mom and dad to lead us and shelter us and nurture us and train us and teach us in the ways of our society, but more importantly in the ways of our God. And there's the family that we marry into when we decide that we are going to be one in spirit, one in flesh, one in blood, to walk these days together until one of us is no longer able to, and the other sees us to that end. And there's the family that we call church. The people that we choose to belong to, the people that we choose to be with, the people that gives us that spirit of hope, and when we fail, forgives us, and when we are doing well, loves us. But in it all, we are reminded that when we are baptized in Christ, we are baptized into a larger family that embraces and loves each of us and all of us. And that love can't separate us. I was with another set of family members yesterday, and I couldn't help but think of this Bible verse that was our first day. For I know the plans I have made for you, and they are good, not of evil. And I want you to cherish and live in those plans. We sometimes get hung up in bylaws and minutes and Robert's rules and rules of conduct, and we forget the Lord worked through Joseph, and those plans don't get realized in a weekend, in a month, even in a year. And because we are in a culture that demands instant gratification and instant resolution to our demands and desires, we lose sight of God's plan and promise for us. We lose sight of our ability to be patient and wait on the Lord. And we lose sight to recognize that when those plans are realized and fulfilled, that we don't take time to celebrate and rejoice. And so just as it was when Jeremiah gave those words, and as it was for us in VBS, and as it is today, you are invited to live in the spirit of those words, that the Lord has something better for us. And as John Robinson says, as he commissions those early pilgrims to come across and be that new light to a new world, there is yet more truth and light to break forth from God's holy word. We are those people. We are the modern pilgrims, setting forth new inspiration through our perspiration, a new way to be, centered in a family we call Christ. Amen.